begin the tale of the Black Orcs, we first must travel to Zharr-Naggrund. The Chaos Dwarfs are a people defined by cold industrial pragmatism. They have no room for mercy, only efficiency. For generations, a singular problem frustrated the sorcerer prophets in the deep mines. Orcs made for wretched slaves. It wasn't a matter of physical capability. Greenskins were tirelessly strong, enduring labor that would break a human in a single shift. It was their nature. Ordinary orcs would murder each other in the pits instead of digging. They ignored complex instructions and smashed delicate machinery out of sheer bored irritation. To the overseers of the plain of Zharr, these creatures were little more than unruly pack animals, unreliable, undisciplined, and utterly useless for the precision required in the great forges. Driven by necessity, the sorcerer prophets turned to dark sorcery and selective breeding to engineer a solution. They sought to craft the ultimate worker, possessing the raw power of an orc, but tempered with a cold intelligence, a creature disciplined enough to follow orders without the lash, and focused enough to work without constant supervision. They were terrifyingly successful in their design. The tragedy of Zharr-Naggrund was that they created a slave with the mind of a conqueror. The process took generations, as the sorcerer prophets didn't want to rush. They possessed the grueling, stubborn patience of the Dawi Zharr, a people who would endure the slow creep of the curse of stone to see their dark works completed. They selected, bred, and subjected their specimens to sorcerous treatments that altered muscle density, bone structure, and the very neurological architecture of the green-skin mind. They bred for size and achieved it. They bred for aggression that could be channeled, refined over decades of pit fighting. They aimed for the capacity to hold formation, to follow orders over extended times, and to maintain discipline where others would descend into anarchy. And slowly, very slowly, they got what they wanted. The creatures that emerged from the deepest pits were larger than any common orc. Their skin was of a darker charcoal hue, and their heavier builds made regular orcs look slight by comparison. And they could think, maybe not with human sophistication, but with a cold, focused intelligence engineered to solve problems rather than simply smash through them. The Chaos Dwarfs looked at their creation and were briefly very pleased. They had finally built the perfect tool of labor, and also war. But the Chaos Dwarfs made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had engineered the Black Orcs to be disciplined and organized. They had taught them to understand hierarchy, to follow commands, and to work together toward a shared objective. In short, to be exactly the kind of creatures who could recognize a position of strength and exploit it with lethal coordination. The Black Orcs looked at their masters with their new mindset and reached a conclusion only they were capable of. They were the strongest creatures in the mines. Their masters were few, and they were organized enough to break their chains together. It was a matter of power. The planning happened in the dark, in the moments when the overseer's attention was elsewhere. The Black Orcs communicated across work shifts. They identified leadership, assessed the numbers of the garrison, and mapped the guard positions. They did exactly what the sorcerer prophets had designed them to do. They applied their cold, focused intelligence to a problem and solved it. Said problem was the very existence of their masters. And so the slave revolt launched by the Black Orcs brought Zharr-Naggrund to the brink of collapse. They fought with the mechanical discipline they had been engineered to possess, utilizing tactics and maintaining formations that no greenskin had ever mastered. They didn't break or succumb to the infighting that usually ruins an orc wag, for they operated as a professional military force inside a city that had never faced an internal threat. The Chaos Dwarfs were prepared for external sieges. They had walls, war machines, and the sorcery to repel any invader from the wastelands. But they were defenseless against an uprising in their own minds. The Black Orcs knew every corridor and forge gate from years of labor, and they perfected the art of urban slaughter. Entire sections of the city were razed, and the ruling sorcerer prophets were driven back to the very steps of the Temple of Hashut. The Zharr were nearly extinguished in their own halls, saved not by their own machines, but by the sudden, opportunistic treachery of the hobgoblins. The Chaos Dwarfs barely contained the revolt, resorting to the most extreme measures like sealing entire levels of the city and flooding lower passages with fire from the demon furnaces. They paid a staggering price in blood and infrastructure, and the lesson they learned was clear. The Black Orcs had to go. They could not be re-enslaved, as the attempt would only trigger a second, final uprising. Yet they could not be easily exterminated without the Zharr destroying their own city in the process. So, the Black Orcs were driven out or allowed to fight their way out of the ruins. They retreated from the Darklands, crossing the passes into the world's edge mountains and the vast wilderness beyond. In the wild, the Black Orcs flourished. They were smarter than any other greenskin, and so hostile to servitude that they had nearly raised a civilization to end it. They established themselves across the old world with the systematic efficiency of creatures engineered for conquest. They overwhelmed them through superior organization and heavy iron. They challenged every war boss who stood in their way and won those challenges with ease, for they fought with a discipline that no other orc could comprehend. In the current age, the Black Orcs function as the iron spine of the most successful wags. They maintain order through immediate lethal violence. If a unit of goblins wavers or a mob of orcs begins to bicker, the Black Orcs execute the dissenters on the spot. This behavior is a biological imperative, a permanent trait rooted in their original design. The Chaos Dwarfs of Zharr-Naggrund now watch as their machinations fuel the destruction of other empires. These warriors obsess over their heavy armors and massive choppers, viewing the scavenged gear of common orcs with pure contempt. They acknowledge no authority beyond physical strength, so when an empire army meets a Black Orc vanguard, the tactical landscape shifts. The baiting maneuvers that usually lure greenskins into traps fail. The psychological pressure of a cavalry charge rarely breaks their line. They hold their ground because they choose to, with a level of focus that makes them one of the most dangerous infantry units in the old world. Will the Zharr ever find a way to leash these monsters, or are the Black Orcs the beginning of greenskin evolution? All these questions and many more will be answered in The Tales of the Old World. Subscribe and click the notifications button, and I shall see you in the next tale.